LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the August 23rd edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. Today I'll be using the 14 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really informative, educational, fair use media criticism for you all today. Plus, I'll be starting with 3 breaking news clips since the Sunday morning shows, including my second clip, which will actually make a reasonable argument that the rapid collapse of the U.S.-supported government in Afghanistan can be blamed on bad cops, really. But first, for my political comedy clip, I want to start with one clip not on my main topic. You know, the main topic is how is Biden handling Afghanistan humanitarian crisis, ? But I decided to take this one clip because I just had to show you this ridiculous Fox News bias from the supposedly straight news anchors this morning, Dana Perino and Bill Hemmer, who were reporting on the breaking news that the FDA granted full approval to the Pfizer vaccine against COVID over in this clip.
A Fox News alert for you now. The FDA just giving full approval to Pfizer's COVID vaccine. It's the first vaccine to get that full approval, and in record time, too. That has critics asking if the process was rushed. Was it? Well, let's bring in Admiral Brett Giroir, former Health and Human Services Assistant Secretary, and of course, he was our testing czar. So tell us a little bit, sir, about what this moment means to get full approval.
Well, this is a very big moment in Operation Warp Speed history and the history of our vaccines, our fight against the pandemic. Prior to this, we had emergency use authorization. What that really meant is that the public health benefits outweighed the known and potential harms. What this says today is we know the benefits, we know the harms, and this vaccine is safe and effective, and every confidence can be given to that. Americans should feel very good, even better than they did yesterday, about getting the vaccine.
Yeah, what took so long?
So you see how Dana Perino started off there questioning why the FDA approval was apparently so rushed, which is terrible messaging that could actually get people killed if it stops people from getting vaccinated. And then to make it comical for, you know, my political comedy clip, by the end there, supposedly straight news anchor Bill Hemmer is asking why it took so long. I mean, that is just ridiculous Fox News bias trying to find any Biden mistakes any which way they can. So I just had to take that clip just because it's so Fox News. And now I'm going to move on. Well, before I get to the main topic as to how Biden is handling the Afghanistan humanitarian crisis, I want to follow up on last week's topic, who lost Afghanistan, which of course is going to come up multiple times during the live stream today. But you may remember that last week I showed you my February 2009 video titled Who Lost Afghanistan? And there's a link down in the video description. I really recommend watching it because it shows how the Bush administration and the Obama administration, George W. Bush administration and the Obama administration, have a lot of blame for who lost Afghanistan before you even get to Trump and Biden. But one of the sources that I depended on in my 2009 video was this woman, Sarah Chayes, who lived in Afghanistan, speaks Pashto, and she talked about how corruption was a big problem in Afghanistan, and corruption that the United States didn't deal with. Well, since last week's show, Sarah Chayes put out an article called The Ides of August on her website. I put a link down to it in the video description. And she actually appeared on Morning Joe this morning. You know, since I'm doing a Monday show, I can take Monday clips. And she actually followed up on the problem of corruption. And like I teased earlier, made a reasonable argument that one of the reasons that the Afghanistan government fell so quickly is because of bad cops, which I will discuss with you a little more after you watch that exchange between Joe Scarborough on MSNBC's Morning Joe this morning and Sarah Chayes over here.
Right. So Sarah, when I read your piece, it was breathtaking, despite the fact I followed this story so closely for 20 years. And I kind of file it under, I knew it was bad. I never knew it was that bad. And I want to focus on two things that you focused on. One, corruption. And I understand Joe Biden going back to 2009, that dramatic scene where he throws the napkin down. He's so angry at Karzai because of the corruption, because they're not getting cooperation. And I read your piece, and my God, the levels of corruption all over the place. Even for those of us who thought it was bad, we never imagined it was bad as you laid out. Can you describe that to our viewers?
Basically, it's any interaction with an Afghan official, you would get shaken down. And, you know, Joe, if you had come to me and I'm an Afghan and you had said, look at Sarah, I'm a cop. You know how low our salaries are. I have a third daughter that's just arrived, and I don't have, you know, sandals for the feet of the second daughter. Could you give me some money? Man, an Afghan would take the shoes off his or her own daughter's feet to give to you. But that's not how police shake people down. They shake people down contemptuously. They humiliate them. So it's not just money that people lose. They lose their dignity, and that's about all they had. And after a while, you get so furious, what you want to do is shoot a cop. Well, in Kandahar, the Taliban were all over everywhere. It was almost hard for the men in my cooperative not to join the Taliban. So you get angry enough, you want to shoot some cops. And that's part of the problem. I had elders who would tell me, look, the Taliban shake us down at night, but the government shakes us down in the daytime. And so the idea that we expected Afghans to take, you know, to risk their lives to defend a government that was treating them that way was really wrong. And I have to say, yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, we have this view of the Taliban, you know, wearing the black hats and the government forces wearing white hats. You being there among them all, you write in the piece that for many Afghans that you interacted with, they really didn't see a big difference between the Taliban and the corruption of the Afghan government.
That's right. And that same gentleman who helped me found that radio, he ended up going to, this is back in 2010 or 11, going to a Taliban kind of court to settle an inheritance dispute, even though he's violently anti-Taliban, because that was the only place he was really able to get, you know, a judgment that he didn't have to pay for.
So there you see Sarah Chayes talking about the theme I talked about last week and my February 2009 video, talking about how corruption and the failure of the United States to deal with corruption among the bad cops, among the governors, it left, you know, like Joe Scarborough was saying, we see the Taliban as the black hats and the Afghan, U.S.-supported Afghan forces as the white hats, but it's a lot more complicated. And as I asked at the end of my February 2009 video, if you were someone in Afghanistan, who would you support? Would it be these conservative clerics of the Taliban or the thieving thugs who the United States installed in their place? It's difficult choice, and it shows one of the reasons over 4 U.S. administrations Afghanistan was lost, especially George W. Bush was the one who let that happen the most. So I wanted to follow up on that from last week, and I will have one more Sarah Chayes clip for the last clip. I actually put a description of all the clips down in the video description, the summaries of what's in every clip, all 14 of them, so you can look down there if you want to know what's coming up or how to skip to what most interests you. But the next breaking news clip, the third non-Sunday morning news show clip, is from Sunday afternoon. Yesterday, Joe Biden gave another speech on what's going on in Afghanistan, trying to shore up problematic poll numbers he's having, and because there's been a lot of bad negative coverage of Joe Biden's handling of Afghanistan in the last week, and you know, he deserves that bad coverage. And it shows you, you know, the people who say that the mainstream media has a liberal bias. No, it has a corporate bias. It will definitely hold Biden accountable for making mistakes. There weren't softball questions at this news conference yesterday. I put the entire news conference at a link down in the video description. You can see it on the White House YouTube channel. This is a question at the end where a reporter asked both about those bad poll numbers and then this question that they keep asking Joe Biden for no reason I can understand. Does he trust the Taliban? And I think in his answer here, he shows kind of the difference between the short-term political consequences of the bad press he's gotten in the last week, but and he contrasts that with the possibility of a better historical context of how he's made the correct strategic decision to get the United States out of Afghanistan after the previous presidents who did not. And anyway, I will talk about all of that a little more after we watch that 5-minute clip from Joe Biden's press conference yesterday afternoon together over here.
Fire away. I don't want you jumping over that.
Following up on Andrew's question, because the United States is now negotiating with the Taliban over airport access and such, do you now trust them? And then a question on the public response. A new poll out today shows Americans wanted to withdraw from Afghanistan, but they disapprove of the way you've handled it. Poll also found that based in part on what's transpired in the last week, the majority of Americans, forgive me, I'm just the messenger, no longer consider you to be competent, focused, or effective in the job.
I haven't seen that poll.
It's out there from CBS this morning. What would you say to those Americans who no longer believe that you
Look,
can do the job?
I had a basic decision to make. I either withdraw America from a 20-year war that, depending on whose analysis you accept, cost us $150 million a day for 20 years or $300 million a day for 20 years, who, and I carry this card with me every day, and who, in fact, where we lost 2,448 Americans dead and 20,722 wounded. Either increase the number of forces we keep there and keep that going, or end the war. And I decided to end the war. As I said the other day, the only reason we're in Afghanistan is this is the place from which bin Laden attacked the United States of America. Had this been in another Middle Eastern country where he could have easily have moved from, we would have never gone to Afghanistan. So the question is, when is the right time to leave? Where are our national interests? Where do they lie? And the idea that we are in a situation where we can not recognize that terrorism has metastasized around the world and the need for us to focus on other parts of the world which create an even greater danger of an al-Qaeda-like operation beginning can't be ignored. And we are, as you well know, because you follow this, we are a number of places where we're doing that without permanent basing American forces there. So I think when this is over, the American people have a clear understanding of what I did, why we did it, and but look, that's the job. My job is to make judgments. My job is to make judgments no one else can or will make. I made them. I'm convinced I'm absolutely correct in not deciding to send more young women and men to war for a war that, in fact, is no longer warranted.
On the question of the Taliban, though, do you trust them now? Do you have to negotiate?
I don't trust anybody, including you. I love you. But, there's not a lot of people I trust. Look, the Taliban has Taliban has to make a fundamental decision. Is the Taliban going to attempt to be able to unite and provide for the well-being of the people of Afghanistan, which no one group has ever done since before, dealing for hundreds of years? And if it does, it's going to need everything from additional help in terms of economic assistance, trade, and a whole range of things. The Taliban has said, we'll see whether they mean it or not. They're seeking legitimacy. They're seeking legitimacy to determine whether or not they will be recognized by other countries. They have told other countries as well as us they don't want us to move our diplomatic presence completely. But so all this is all just talk now. All just talk now. And so far, the Taliban has not taken action against U.S. forces. So far, they have, by and large, followed through on what they said in terms of allowing Americans to pass through and the like. And I'm sure they don't control all of their forces. It's a ragtag force. And so we'll see. We'll see whether or not what they say turns out to be true. But the bottom line is this, folks. Look, at the end of the day, if we didn't leave Afghanistan now, when do we leave? Another 10 years? Another 5 years? Another year? I'm not about to send your son or your daughter to fight in Afghanistan. I don't see where that is in our overwhelming interest. And the talk about how our interests are going to be impacted, let me tell you, you're sitting in Beijing or you're sitting in Moscow. Are you happy we left? They'd love nothing better for us to continue to be bogged down there, totally occupied with what's going on. So the idea, I think that history is going to record, this was the logical, rational, and right decision to make. So thank you all so very much.
So you can see there, like I said, Joe Biden making this historical argument, and from like a strategic perspective, and as I've mentioned sometimes before on my live streams, I actually have a degree in history it's actually from Yale University, and my focus when I got my degree in history was on recent military history, and I studied strategy. I even took a course in grand strategy as one of my junior seminars, looking through several hundred years of history and how grand strategy shaped the decisions that countries made. And so I have some understanding of the difference between strategy and tactics, and I think, and there's different levels in between, but I think from a historical, grand strategic perspective, what Biden is doing is the right decision. But there is a lot of questioning of tactics and what's going on in terms of the evacuation and how things were planned. And I'm going to cover that. That's the main topic. How is Biden handling it? But I think that answer there, it's a good answer from Biden, explaining how, and that answer, hopefully, if, nothing really much worse happens in the next week or two regarding the Afghanistan evacuation and the humanitarian crisis. I mean, so far, no Americans have been killed. There have been, no mass slaughters. Or I saw like 20 people were trampled yesterday, and there have been a few other incidents, but mainly there haven't been any like huge tragedies, any hostages taken. Those are all things that could happen, and that would make things worse for Biden. But I think there's a good chance that historical perspective that he put on what he's doing will actually, in the November 2022 elections, and especially if he runs for re-election in 2024, that you just heard his debate answer there as to why it was a good idea to withdraw from Afghanistan the way he did. Did I say Iraq earlier? Every now and then I say Iraq when I mean Afghanistan, and that's just because I lived through both those wars, and as a political junkie, not as someone who actually lived through them as a soldier or as one of the people of Afghanistan or Iraq. That was, I'm sure, the human suffering, the humanitarian crisis, that's something we should all focus on, is, I guess, the point of that. But now I'm going to get to the news summaries, and even though that answer from Biden was pretty good, I thought, in his press conference yesterday afternoon, he has said some things that aren't factually true, and that's never good in terms of, the day-to-day handling of a humanitarian crisis. And the next two clips, first NBC News' Meet the Press, and then Fox News Sunday from Chris Wallace, focus on that, on how Biden is not doing things well. And I think actually the harder focus on that comes from NBC News' Meet the Press. This kind of supports the argument I was making earlier that the mainstream media doesn't have a left-wing bias, that when there are negative things to cover about Democratic administration, they will cover it, and you'll see Chuck Todd cover it here. I cut out the Richard Engel report on threats at the airport, except for like a brief snippet about how apparently now ISIS is threatening people waiting outside the airport. But anyway, I'll talk about that. And then the Fox News Sunday clip. Well, first I'll show the NBC News Meet the Press news summary. I have the news summaries from longest to shortest. Here's the longest and best news summary, Chuck Todd and his pre-recorded package over here.
Good Sunday morning. We're going to get right to it. 1 week after the Taliban took total control of Kabul, the crisis at the city's airport remains a scene of chaos and panic. Fearful crowds are now being harassed and menaced by Taliban fighters. They're still desperately trying to get into the airport and out of Afghanistan. And now, on top of all of this, there's an ISIS threat against Americans in the area as well. So we're going to get right to our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel.
So is it surprising that there is a threat against them from ISIS, this very extremist group? They're telling them all to congregate in one place. They need another staging area.
That's for sure, and then some, and perhaps more troops. Richard Engel in Doha, Qatar for us. Richard, glad you got out. Look, politicians from both parties and four administrations have their fingerprints on America's 20-year Afghanistan policy. But it is now President Biden who has become the face of this disastrous withdrawal. We have a new NBC News poll taken as Americans were witnessing this chaos in Kabul. Among all adults, Mr. Biden's approval rating stands at a fairly mediocre 49%. 48% disapproving in our polarized politics. That isn't the end of the world. But if you compare it to last April, when the numbers were 53% approved, 39% disapproved, you start to see some erosion. Now, not surprisingly, approval of Mr. Biden's handling of the situation in Afghanistan as we're watching all this is extremely low, just 25%. But the president's overall slippage is less about Afghanistan than about two other issues. Approval of his handling of the coronavirus is down a whopping 16 points, just 53% approved now from 69 in April. And approval of his handling of the economy is standing at 47%. That's upside down now because it was at 52. Mr. Biden has weeks to set things right in Afghanistan and more than 3 years until the next presidential election. But let's be honest, with headlines like this one in The Economist, the human tragedy at the end of this forever war is threatening to be a forever stain on Mr. Biden's presidency.
But let me be clear. Any American who wants to come home, we will get you home.
President Biden defending the chaotic U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan.
We have no indication that they haven't been able to get in Kabul through the airport. We've made an agreement with the Taliban thus far. They've allowed them to go through.
I can say definitively that that is completely untrue.
David Fox is an American still in Afghanistan.
The only way that you can actually get to the U.S. Marines is by fighting your way in. Just by pure physical, brutal force.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin told lawmakers Friday that Americans trying to leave Afghanistan have been harassed and even beaten by Taliban fighters. And it's not clear how many Americans remain in Afghanistan.
We don't have a perfect figure of how many are in Afghanistan, let alone Kabul. If you're an American and you're at a gate, you will be let in that gate.
Thousands of Afghans continue to crowd the airport, barred from entering by Taliban shooting, flashbangs, and whips.
They run behind you with the AK-47, and they pong, 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 pong.
The U.S. says it will bring up to 22,000 Afghans to the United States and facilitate more to other countries. The International Rescue Committee estimates more than 300,000 Afghan civilians have been affiliated with the United States mission since 2001.
If you go outside, of course they will kill us.
I'm old enough to remember Saigon. This is a lot worse than Saigon in 1975.
But despite the president's claims,
I have seen no question of our credibility from our allies around the world.
Some U.S. allies are criticizing the president and questioning America's role in the world.
This is a catastrophe.
To see their commander-in-chief call into question the courage of men I fought with, to claim that they ran. It's shameful.
This is a shame on all of us, not just America, but also the whole of NATO.
President Biden ran on competence and good judgment. How much will the chaos in Afghanistan erode his standing? While just 25% of Americans approve of his current handling of Afghanistan, Americans are still sour on the war overall, 61% saying it wasn't worth it.
Send your sons, your daughters, like my son was sent to Iraq, to maybe die? And for what? For what?
And joining me now is President Biden's National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan.
And I will have both Jake Sullivan and Anthony Blinken clips coming up in the Newsmakers. Also, Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, who was quoted in that piece there, was a guest on ABC. I'll have a clip of him. And they'll be responding to both the Biden's planning of the Afghan withdrawal and whether that led to this crisis, humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan right now, and then some of his misstatements. And you saw there that NBC News Meet the Press did contradict several statements by President Biden, show that they were factually inaccurate. I also at least appreciated how Meet the Press started off there saying that there were 4 administrations that have fingerprints on this, but now Biden's the face of it. I mean, I guess that's true, but I wish more people would talk about, especially what George W. Bush did, that what I talked about last week in the Who Lost Afghanistan episode of my Monday media mix-up. And then they also talked about poll numbers, I don't know, maybe too much because it's just a snapshot, but how also not just Afghanistan, but handling of COVID and the economy is starting to drop, and that does not bode well for the Biden presidency. So that's significant negative coverage of Joe Biden by the supposed liberal mainstream media. I wanted to point that out, and not that different from the way Fox News covers it, but they give you negative coverage of Biden, whether there's reason for the negative coverage or not, as I pointed out many weeks. But there is this week, so I'll talk about the Fox News Sunday news summary from Chris Wallace and Trey Yingst after we watch that clip together over here.
And hello again from Fox News in Washington. It has been a brutal week for President Biden's foreign policy as the U.S. continues its chaotic evacuation from Afghanistan, and the president tries to rewrite expectations for Americans and U.S. allies. In a series of appearances, the president contradicted his own advisors on everything from the terror threat in Afghanistan to what the military and intelligence communities were telling him. Right now, thousands of Americans and Afghan allies await guidance on whether and how to try to reach the Kabul airport. In a moment, we'll discuss all this with the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. But first, let's bring in Trey Yingst in Doha, Qatar, with the latest on the situation on the ground in Kabul.
An injured child is carried through the crowd as soldiers work to sort through a sea of people. Gunfire and scenes of chaos erupted for the 6th straight day outside of Kabul's only airport. It's been a week since the Taliban took control of the capital, and these families' lives are changed forever. Amid new threats, the State Department is now urging U.S. citizens to avoid travel to Kabul's airport over fears they could be attacked. The Taliban now controls an estimated 600,000 weapons, 75,000 vehicles, and 200 aircraft, all formerly given to Afghan security forces by the United States. To escape the danger, evacuees are being flown to regional countries like Pakistan, the UAE, and Qatar, until they can be processed and given permanent homes. In Doha, hundreds of Afghans are sheltering, a world away from the turmoil engulfing their homeland. These university students from Kabul fear they'll never be able to return and say the Taliban will only get more brutal once American forces complete their withdrawal later this month.
People, all Afghans, are scared that if Americans completely leave, then Taliban's true colors will show.
There are reports of opposition figures in the Panjshir Valley staging an opposition against the Taliban, though the group has millions of dollars worth of American weaponry and equipment now, so anyone who tries to challenge them faces an uphill battle. Chris?
Trey Yingst reporting from Doha. Trey, thank you. And joining us now, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. Mr. Secretary, welcome.
And I will have a clip of that Antony Blinken interview where you'll see Chris Wallace follow up on his introduction there, where he talked about Biden's statements being contradicted by his top advisors and facts on the ground, kind of like what Chuck Todd and talked about in his introduction and news summary. I mean, the one thing that I think you get more from Fox News there that is, targeted at their Republican base viewers is you saw more focus on, pictures of hurt children and civilians, and then also, more scary Taliban pictures, and that's something that Fox News will often show to its viewers to make them, scared. And they're even in the opinion hours on Fox News, they're trying to make people scared of Afghan refugees, which is pretty much you saw there that Fox News was trying to make people feel empathetic and sympathetic for these Afghan civilians. But if you watch like Laura Ingraham and Tucker Carlson in the evenings, they're trying to scare you that these people are going to come unvetted to your neighborhoods, and they're like terrorists and, brown people. And of course it's, that's the Fox News brand, is the point I'm trying to make. But I'm going to talk about a different kind of bias for the CBS News Face the Nation news summary. I said earlier, as I've often said, that the mainstream media doesn't have a liberal bias. It has a corporate bias. It has a bias towards sensationalism, for simplification, for both-sidism. And then one of the other biases of all the media, the corporate media here in the United States, that I've often talked about, is they have this bias for things that happen on the East Coast and especially New York. And there was definitely over coverage of this hurricane turned tropical storm Henri because it hit New York. And for some reason, in the next two news summaries, you'll see that mentioned. And that was the main focus of CBS News Face the Nation's news summary with Major Garrett. And then I'm going to show the first of multiple reporters they had doing this thing that they always do on the corporate media. I don't know why they love doing this. They have like somebody out there in a raincoat getting like rained on with, wind and rain. Why they send people out to do those reports? Well, anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch the CBS. This is the beginning of CBS News Face the Nation. This is supposedly the most important story to start off the show over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. We begin with a storm threatening the East Coast. Henri has been downgraded to tropical storm status, but that doesn't necessarily mean the threat is any less severe. CBS News meteorologist and climate specialist Jeff Berardelli is on Long Island in the Montauk area. Jeff, what are you seeing?
Yeah, Major, this is the worst that it's been. We've been seeing gusts 55, 60 miles an hour. Up until this point, it wasn't that bad, but things are getting worse. We're in one of the outer bands, but the core of the storm has missed us to the northeast. Take a look behind me, pounding surf. We've seen swells 10 to 15 feet, and now we have this sideways rain running right towards us. The storm itself, let's take a look at the radar, located near Block Island. This is headed northward towards the coast of Rhode Island and Connecticut, anywhere from Mystic to Narragansett, where the worst is likely to be. And we're going to see about 5 feet of storm surge as the storm makes its way on shore. Couple that with a full moon, and that makes it worse. Likely in the core, wind gusts up to around 80 miles an hour, and that means we're likely to see some power outages. So that's some of the worst that we're likely to see with this system, as well as all the heavy rain that you can see.
Jeff, for those in the path of this storm, how concerned should they be about the potential of flooding?
Yeah, so this could be what this storm is remembered for. I mean, last night in New York City, the concert was canceled. Hundreds of miles away from the center of Henri, we had all that heavy rain. The reason why, upper level low across the middle Atlantic connected through a tropical connection to Henri, kind of funneling all that tropical moisture in. And so we had a little trough that set up and dumped heavy rain over the Jersey Shore and New York City to the tune of 5 to 8 inches of rainfall. So we're going to see this storm kind of slow down as it moves inland, dump heavy rain way away from the center. I think some places will end up with 10 inches of rain, and that means we're going to see life-threatening flash flooding. So even though this isn't a major hurricane, it's having major impacts.
Jeff Berardelli, thank you so much. We want to go now to Chris Van Cleve. He is in Old Saybrook, Connecticut, as residents there brace for landfall. Chris, tell us what you're seeing.
Major, we're in an area.
And I'll spare you the second guy in the raincoat in the rain. I'm not sure why they do that. Maybe you can give me your opinion down. I mean, I don't want to totally minimize the impact of storms on people in the path of the storm, but if that storm were hitting even Los Angeles, we're hitting Houston, we're hitting San Francisco, we wouldn't have that much coverage on the Sunday morning news analysis shows. There might still be some, but there's this huge bias for things that hit the East Coast, and I wanted to point that out. And You can contrast it on CNN's State of the Union. The guest host this week, Brianna Keilar, at least bifurcated it into two stories. So I think the word bifurcation comes up later, but cut it into two different stories, the home and abroad concerns. So it's not quite as biased towards this storm. That how important is that storm going to be a week from now or a year from now? CBS, covered the COVID story earlier than everyone else and recognized the most important story before everyone else. But this week, Major Garrett and CBS News' Face the Nation, I think, kind of dropped the ball on over-prioritizing the hurricane coverage. A little bit better over on CNN State of the Union, as I will talk about with you a little more after we watch the beginning of that program from yesterday morning together over here.
Hello, I'm Brianna Keilar in Washington, where the state of our union is worried about friends at home and abroad. The outer bands of Tropical Storm Henri have begun to pummel the northeastern United States as more than 50 million people wake up under tropical storm alerts. Henri is expected to make landfall in just hours on Long Island or New England. All the latest and an update about expected flooding and storm surge ahead. Now, we are also watching the situation in Afghanistan at the Kabul airport, growing more dangerous and desperate by the minute, with 14,000 people there waiting to get out. The State Department now warning Americans in Afghanistan not to travel to the airport, as a top U.S. official warns there is a strong possibility ISIS will attempt an attack there. A Pentagon spokesman did not rule out the possibility that U.S. troops would leave the airport to rescue Americans who could not get there safely. And after President Biden committed to evacuating any Americans who wanted to leave, as well as the tens of thousands of Afghan partners who helped the U.S. during the war. Over a 24-hour period this weekend, the U.S. evacuated 3,800 people from Afghanistan, and the Secretary of Defense has moved this morning to compel commercial airliners to help transport refugees from military bases in the region. Our Sam Kiley is there at the Kabul airport. Sam, can you tell us what you're seeing?
So, I can forgive CNN for starting off with Tropical Storm Henri when they also folded in what was the more important story, better than CBS News Face the Nation. And then to round off the news summaries, I will give you the shortest of the five. This is ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where we have host Martha Raddatz, the one who scored the interview with Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. And I've often said about Martha Raddatz that she's really close to military sources, military and intelligence sources, the military-industrial complex, which means that she's often like a water carrier for their point of view, but also she scores, these great interviews that nobody else gets because I guess people in the military trust her more, including Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. That is the clip after next. But first, let me finish the news summaries. Like I said, Martha Raddatz introducing the topic of the Afghanistan humanitarian crisis on ABC yesterday morning over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. It has been exactly 1 week since the fall of Afghanistan, a swift, stunning outcome that has created a political crisis for the Biden administration and a desperate humanitarian mission. There is chaos in Kabul and renewed urgency to rescue the some 15,000 Americans on the ground and the tens of thousands of Afghan allies. Those that remain are facing increasingly dangerous conditions. Gunfire erupting above swarming crowds outside the airport, where stampedes have left several dead. Children being hoisted over razor wire into the hands of U.S. military as reunification efforts are underway for minors now separated from their parents. A month ago, 70% of the country agreed with President Biden's decision to end military operations by that iconic September 11th deadline. The issue, though, is not withdrawal. It is a failure of intelligence and planning that led to the chaos we are seeing, which President Biden now says was always to be expected. We'll cover all of it this morning, and we begin with ABC's Ian Panel on the ground in Kabul, who has been reporting there for weeks. Good morning, Ian.
And you can watch Ian Panel's report and all the reporters' reports that I've cut out from yesterday at the links down in the video description, where you can see the full programs that I'm taking my clips from. You can see the source of all my clips. But before I get to Martha Raddatz's interview with Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin that I talked about before that clip, I wanted to, and Lloyd Austin is one of 3 Biden administration officials who went on the Sunday shows. I have clips from all of them. I have the Lloyd Austin clip, exclusive interview by Martha Raddatz, like I said. Then I have the White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan in, one clip, and then 2 clips of Secretary of State Antony Blinken before I get to the final Sarah Chayes clip. But before I get to that, all those administration clips, I want to show one Republican who is sort of an anti-Trump Republican, so I guess kind of a centrist Republican. He's not quite as bad as Liz Cheney, who was on Meet the Press, and I almost took a clip of, but anyway, I don't want to go off onto that tangent. This is Representative Adam Kinzinger, and I wanted to show this clip because it does sort of relate back to my topic from last week and my criticisms of the mainstream media or the corporate media last week, that they have a sort of a problem with long-term memory. So the best they could do is like make it a two-sided, both-sidism or two-sided argument. Is this Biden's fault or Trump's fault? And that argument definitely comes up in Adam Kinzinger's discussion here with Brianna Keilar on CNN's State of the Union yesterday. And he even mentions the Obama administration, although he's talking about the special immigrant visas, which isn't the... I was talking about last week how the Obama surge was a mistake. They don't get back to George W. Bush, so they get 3 administrations, not all 4, but at least 3, which is good. And anyway, I'll talk about all of that a little more with you after we watch that discussion between Brianna Keilar and Adam Kinzinger on CNN's State of the Union yesterday. Over here.
In the circumstances they were handed.
We're seeing almost a bifurcation right now of U.S. citizens being...
Oh, and didn't I promise you the word bifurcation would come up again before I showed the CNN State of the Union news summary? Well, promise made, promise kept. Bifurcation.
In the circumstances they were handed.
We're seeing almost a bifurcation right now of U.S. citizens being told by, the State Department not to come to the airport, it's too dangerous. But you're not seeing these visa applicants or folks who are eligible for that, people who helped, Afghans who helped the U.S., being deterred by that. And part of that is because they see the deadline, this August 31st deadline, and it's coming up fast for them. According to the New York Times, the 2-year-old daughter of a former interpreter was trampled to death in the crowd. Do you think the president is making good on his promise to get Americans and Afghans who helped Americans and their families out?
Look, I certainly think he's trying. I'm not going to say that, President Biden at this moment wants to do anything but that. I think the execution has been extremely disastrous. But I also think you have to go back not just early in this administration, but especially the last administration, and frankly, even President Obama's, and say, why was this Afghan civ issue, the special immigrant visas, processed so slowly? I've been working on this since I've been in Congress, by the way. We could have worked this. There have been people sitting in Afghanistan for 5 years that were maybe waiting on just one piece of that. Why did Stephen Miller, particularly in the last administration, slow it down? Well, a Republican staffer on Judiciary that told us there's not a chance we would be able to slip in raising the cap on the special immigrant visas to help get rid of some of this backlog. And then, of course, the State Department under multi-administrations. Why was it so slow at processing these? But we are where we are, and I'm going to tell you, Brianna, what's most important, there's nobody that really doubts we're never going to be in a war again. If we fail to follow through on our commitment to these Afghans, that's going to put our serious national security at risk. If we fail to follow through with their well-being when they're here. By the way, it's Country First, country1st.com. We have a fund set up to help Afghan refugees and their families. And we've raised, this is what's amazing to me, over $80,000. And that just shows the heart of the American people are with these folks' plight.
You're seeing members of your party, some of whom you mentioned there, President Trump, certainly others, Mike Pompeo, Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, and they've criticized the Biden administration despite contributing to this SIV backlog. What's your reaction to them rewriting history?
It's amazing. I think what breaks my heart probably more than anything on a political side is that America is being splayed out in the world and embarrassed by the world, and our European allies are saying America looks weak. And yet, honestly, the Republicans are putting out talking points to make Biden look bad. The Democrats are putting out talking points to point at the past administration. Truth, they're both responsible. And we're so tribalistic as a country, it's hard for somebody to imagine a Republican saying everybody's responsible. But let's keep in mind, Mike Pompeo met with the Taliban as Donald Trump was publicly saying, we have to get out of Afghanistan at all costs, it's not worth it. Mike Pompeo meets with the Taliban and tries to negotiate something. By the way, they ended up getting rolled harder than almost as bad as Neville Chamberlain, because they knew what the desired outcome of the Trump administration was. So they set this up to fail, but always, of course, Joe Biden could have easily turned this around and instead used it as the excuse to get out. Both parties have failed the American people, and it can't continue, and it particularly can't continue with just pointing fingers while America's embarrassed in front of the world.
You mentioned the effort.
So, yeah, I guess Representative Adam Kinzinger gives kind of the most bipartisan or nonpartisan look at who's to blame there, and that's, again, kind of a who lost Afghanistan follow-up. He did talk about Obama. He did talk about some of the things with the Trump administration. He talked about some of the things I talked about last week in terms of Mike Pompeo meeting with the Taliban and giving them cover or giving them legitimacy, and also how that hurt the morale of the Afghan forces. But one thing he didn't mention that I mentioned last week, no one mentions how the Trump administration got Pakistan to release the current leader of the Taliban. Let me see, his name is Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, if I have that correct. That's one thing I would add to Adam Kinzinger's bipartisan criticisms there, or including the criticisms of what the Trump administration did. And you'll hear a little bit more of that from Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin talking about what Joe Biden inherited in terms of problems the Biden administration had with planning for this withdrawal and evacuation. And this is, like I said, Martha Raddatz has some biases for the military-industrial complex, like pretty much all the corporate news media, because they're large corporations, and large corporations benefit from, our forever wars. Who most benefited from the trillions of dollars we spent on Afghanistan? It's big defense contractors and, Halliburton. Well, I don't know specifically Halliburton, but the contractors that we paid to go in and do stuff in Afghanistan. There are a lot of people who made a lot of money. So that is an issue that doesn't really get brought up enough. I just wanted to add that in. But in terms of what the Biden administration inherited from the Trump administration, that's one of the things that Lloyd Austin talks about with Martha Raddatz. I forgot where I started that whole long thing about it. It was the corporate news media has a bias towards forever wars, and Martha Raddatz is one of the of all the anchors. I think she's the closest to that military-industrial complex, and I don't know, but she does get these exclusive interviews. Like I said earlier, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin didn't go on any of the other programs, and he had to even get a waiver to become Secretary of Defense, because you're supposed to not have been an active military officer for 10 years before, because it's civilian control of the military. But he got a waiver, so he's recent military, and that, I guess, why Martha Raddatz has good contacts with him, like she does with so many people in the military-industrial complex. But she does ask some probing questions that I will discuss with you a little more. Sorry, I kind of lost track of my topic there in the middle of that commentary, but I found my way, and I'll talk about what Martha Raddatz says to the Secretary of Defense a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
In the environment.
We saw those first days of people clinging to airplanes, falling to their death, the absolute utter chaos, and that's still going on outside the airport. How did this happen?
Very disturbing images indeed, Martha, as we moved into the airfield and began to secure the airfield. There were a number of civilians that got onto the airfield before we could completely seal it off. And that was caused by the panic that was created because the government simply dissolved and the security forces evaporated.
The president told our George Stephanopoulos that he doesn't think this exit could have been handled any better way, that chaos would ensue no matter what. Do you agree with that?
I agree that if the government collapses to the degree that it did, if the security forces evaporate at the speed that they did, you will clearly have chaos, and that's what we saw.
Let's go back to the planning. We closed Bagram. I was over there with General Miller, and there were concerns about closing Bagram. There were concerns about Afghan interpreters at the point. Whose job was it to worry about those interpreters, those Afghans at risk?
Our goal was to keep the embassy open and also provide a security element in and around Kabul International to protect the embassy and protect our interest in the immediate area. In terms of whose job it was to address the special immigrant visa applicants, it's all of our job. It's an interagency process that's really honchoed or led by the State Department, but it's all of our responsibility.
Are you going to get them all out of there? I know all your people here are working hard, but there's no real way to get this done right now.
I'm sure that if people, 5 days ago looked at where we were, they would say you probably can't get very much done at all. If you look at what we're doing now and evacuating thousands of people every day, it really has been a tremendous piece of work. In terms of what we'll be able to accomplish going forward, we can't place a specific figure on exactly what we'll be able to do. But I'll just tell you that we're going to try to exceed expectations and do as much as we can and take care of as many people as we can for as long as we can.
I know the president has said that the intelligence absolutely did not show that the Taliban could take over in 11 days. What's the earliest you were aware that could happen?
There were assessments that ranged initially from 1 to 2 years to several months, but it was a wide range of assessments. And as the Taliban began to make gains, and then we saw that in a number of cases there was less fighting and more surrendering and more forces just kind of evaporating, it was very difficult to predict with accuracy. This all occurred in a span of about 11 days. Nobody predicted that the government would fall in 11 days.
When you look at the planning, I mean, Joe Biden has said he wanted to get out of there for years and years. So it was probably pretty certain that he would say that. Do you believe, as you look at it now, and the military loves to plan for the worst case, that the planning was acceptable and appropriate?
I do, based upon what we were looking at in the inputs to the plan. But I think you have to go back and look at what the administration inherited. I mean, we came in and we were faced with a May 1 deadline to have all forces out of the country. This deal had been struck with the Taliban. And so he had to very rapidly go through a detailed assessment and look at all options in terms of what he could do. And none of those options were good options. He went through a very rigorous process, very detailed process. He listened to the input that was provided by all of the stakeholders in the interagency process, and And so at the end of the day, the president made his decision. But again, he was faced with a situation where there were no good options. All were very tough.
Did you want to see a small force remain in Afghanistan?
Martha, and you know I'm not going to tell you what my recommendation to our president was. I would just tell you that like everyone else, the president listened to our input. Again, he conducted a very rigorous and thoughtful process, and he made a decision. And I support that.
So there you see a detailed defense of the Biden administration from the Secretary of Defense exclusively on ABC. And while you were watching that, or while I watched it with you, I took a couple notes. One thing I noticed Martha Raddatz said there is shows how she has real sympathy, empathy with the people who are, the soldiers and the military and even the Pentagon people. She says to the head of the Defense Department, "I know all your people are working hard," which, I mean, I guess she has great context, so she knows how hard they work, but it definitely shows her sympathy. But she also, because she knows the military-industrial complex and the military so well, she asked a question there. I don't know if you caught it there. She's saying, "You knew Biden wanted out, like right from the beginning, and the military loves to plan for the worst-case scenario, so why didn't you plan for what's happening?" I mean, in that question, based on what I know about the military from studying military history and military strategy, and especially focusing on recent U.S. military history, and also a lot of the news sources I've been seeing say, you saw there the Secretary of Defense at the end wouldn't tell Martha Raddatz what his recommendation was to Biden as to whether they should have left some, the residual force that a lot of people argued for. And, I showed Morning Joe earlier, Joe Scarborough keeps saying, we could have just left, we leave troops in Japan and Germany and South Korea. We could have left those troops there forever, which may or may not be true because the Taliban was getting stronger and stronger, and it would have required more and more troops to even protect the status quo. But the point I'm trying to make here is I think Secretary of State Lloyd Austin and many people in the military didn't want to do that final pullout, and so maybe they didn't plan as well as they could have, or I don't know. I mean, is there some possibility that the military is trying to make Biden look bad because he didn't follow their advice, and he should take a hit for not I don't know. That is pure speculation on my part, but it's almost in the premise of Martha Raddatz's question there about why didn't you plan for this better since you knew Biden wanted to get out, and maybe the answer is because they really didn't want to get out, and this is the price politically Biden has to pay. Is that possible? You can let me know what you think in the comment section about that speculation. But now I'm going to get to 3 more Biden administration official clips. 1 from Jake Sullivan, 2 from Antony Blinken. I think that's right. Yeah. The first Jake Sullivan clip is talking about something you heard Lloyd Austin answering Martha Raddatz's questions about is, well, why didn't they keep Bagram Air Base open? Because it's a military base. It has all these runways. The Hamid Karzai International Airport, they keep calling it Hakia or something, because it's HKIA. That only has 1 runway, and anyway, you've heard it's not even in Kabul, it's outside of Kabul, and Jake Sullivan answers that question. And the first question that Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press asks him is interesting about, why didn't you withdraw the military last, is basically the question. Interesting because I watched a speech that Trump gave in Alabama Saturday night. I watched it so you don't have to, I guess. And I almost took a political comedy clip from it, but I didn't really want to subject you to Trump. But one of the things he talked about was you take out the civilians first and then the military. And he was at a party where there was some 5-year-old child who he asked if you should take out the civilians first or the military, and the 5-year-old said to him, "Sir, you should leave the military until all the civilians are evacuated." And that's one of the tells I've talked about back in the Trump administration, when almost always if you hear Trump say "sir," that's when he's lying. So, but that question, at least, why didn't you evacuate all the civilians before you took out the military? That is the main question that Chuck Todd starts off asking Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, and then also about Bagram Air Base in a clip I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Look, there's a lot of after-action reports that are going to come out. There's going to be a lot of this fallout. But it seems that the core mistake here, it appears, in your withdrawal plan, was pulling the military out before the civilians and before our allies. Why did the military get withdrawn before the civilians? Does that, in hindsight, that looks like just a catastrophic mistake.
Which civilians are you referring to, Chuck?
Our American diplomats, the Americans to get out, our Afghan allies, all the people we wanted to get out. Why did we withdraw the military and our military support before we could get that out? Why did we hand over Bagram before we got these people out?
Let me start with our diplomats, because the plan from the beginning was to sustain a U.S. diplomatic presence in Kabul after our military departed. That was the plan from the beginning, and because we believed that if necessary, we could draw down our embassy presence in a crisis and get all of our diplomats out. We had a plan in place to do that. We did that. With respect to American citizens in Kabul, we began messaging them months ago, telling them that the situation was deteriorating and that they should leave the country. We explained to them that if they didn't have the financial resources to be able to leave the country, those resources would be provided to them. Many chose to stay right till the end, and that, of course, was their choice. And then what we did was made sure that we had a plan in place, with the president ordering 3 military battalions pre-positioned in the Gulf to be able to fly in and secure that airfield so that those American citizens could be evacuated. We are doing that now. And finally, when it comes to Bagram, the best military advice that we received was that, number one, Bagram is an immense facility that would be difficult to secure over time and put our troops at risk. And second, it didn't logistically make sense from an evacuation perspective because it is located outside of Kabul, and both American diplomats, American citizens, and most of the Afghans at risk live inside of Kabul. That is the reason for Bagram, which was the recommendation offered to the president by his national security experts at the Pentagon and elsewhere.
So you followed the military advice on closing Bagram, but the same military advisors were telling you to keep a force on the ground. They told you not to pursue this withdrawal agreement with the Taliban, correct?
There are strategic judgments that a president makes, and there are tactical judgments that you give absolute premium to the commanders on the ground to make. If a commander on the ground says, I need this resource or this move to accomplish my mission or keep my people safe, you weigh that very heavily. But when it comes to the fundamental question of whether the United States should remain in a civil war in Afghanistan with American men and women fighting and dying for a 3rd decade, that is a presidential call, not a call by anyone at the Pentagon or the State Department or the intelligence community.
The president said on Monday you plan for every contingency. If this is a plan, it doesn't look like it's been well thought out. Did you really plan for this contingency, or is this the one contingency you didn't plan for?
You know, Chuck, I know that the scenes around the airport are heartbreaking. Large crowds of people wanting to leave. I know that there is complexity and there is turbulence on the ground in Kabul. And it's very risky and dangerous because there's a genuine threat from ISIS-K. That is the reality of what we are up against. And I'm not going to sugarcoat that reality. But Chuck, let's just review what has happened. A week after Kabul fell, we have 30,000 people evacuated from the country. We have control of an airport in a city controlled by the other side after the collapse of the government. We are moving people through and out. thousands of people at a time. We have agreements with 26 nations around the world to logistically move Afghans and Americans and third country nationals out of the country into air bases throughout neighboring countries and further afield. All of that within 7 days. No plan survives first contact with reality. No plan can account for every contingency that occurs at a tactical level on a day-to-day basis. What you do is you adjust, and we've adjusted, and while we are continuing to face genuine challenges, we believe we are making progress.
Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor to President.
So, again, it's good questioning by Chuck Todd of a Biden administration official. And you heard the answer to the question that Trump was talking about. Do you take out the military first? Well, you know, people have free will, and basically they didn't want to get out till when they didn't realize that Kabul was not going to be controlled by the U.S.-supported Afghan government, which didn't become clear until the very end. And so how do you make people leave when they think they have some period of time after the troop withdrawal to make their way out, waiting to see, and, they even thought that the U.S. Embassy would be there for a while because, that's the one mistake they made, was they didn't realize how fast the U.S.-supported Afghan government was going to collapse. Though, as Martha Raddatz pointed out in the previous clip, the military does tend to prepare for the worst-case scenarios, so why they didn't have a plan for that, or they had some plan, because then they came in the last week and retook the airport, and so far the number of American deaths that I know of is 0, and even civilian deaths aren't that high. So anyway, and you saw the Bagram Airport answer there that complements what Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said in the previous clip. Now, this next clip is several cross-examination questions from Chris Wallace. He will sometimes do this to Republicans, but is definitely more pointed when it comes to Democrats. And this is the theme I was talking about at the very beginning of the news summaries. You saw how both NBC and Fox News covered multiple misstatements by Biden, and that, even if he's making the strategically correct decision, and you heard Jake Sullivan talking about the difference between strategy and tactics in that last clip. To make factual misstatements, it's just an unforced error. It just cuts his credibility, decreases those poll numbers about his competence, and all of that. So it's definitely a worthwhile issue for the cross-examination. And I will talk about Chris Wallace's cross-examination of the Secretary of State Antony Blinken on misstatements by President Joe Biden after we watch that clip. First, he asked him about the misstatement about how easy it was to get to the airport. And this clip is already almost 5 minutes, so I cut that part out, but I'll talk about the rest of the cross-examination with you after we watch that clip from Fox News Sunday yesterday morning together over here.
In addition to the question of the security and the ease of Americans getting to the airport, the president on Friday said a few other things that were flat wrong, Mr. Secretary. Here he is on the threat from al-Qaeda.
What interest do we have in Afghanistan at this point with al-Qaeda gone?
But a UN report this summer says that al-Qaeda is present in 15 of the 34 provinces of Afghanistan. And General Milley said this summer that if the Taliban fell, that he was, or rather took over Kabul, that he was going to have to upgrade the terror threat from al-Qaeda. What the president said just wasn't true.
Chris, step back for 1 second. First, as we all know, we went to Afghanistan 20 years ago with one mission and one purpose in mind. And that was to deal with the folks who attacked us on 9/11, to bring bin Laden to justice, which we did a decade ago, and to diminish the capacity of al-Qaeda to do the same thing again, to attack us from Afghanistan. And that, to the president's point, has been successful. We got bin Laden a decade ago.
But Mr. Secretary, the president
Please.
said al-Qaeda is gone. Simple question: is al-Qaeda gone from Afghanistan?
Al-Qaeda's capacity to do what it did on 9/11, to attack us, to attack our partners or allies from Afghanistan, is vastly, vastly diminished.
Is it gone?
Are there Al-Qaeda members and remnants in Afghanistan? Yes, but what the president was referring to was its capacity to do what it did on 9/11, and that capacity has been very successfully diminished.
Here's another statement that the president made that was flat wrong. Take a look.
I have seen no question of our credibility from our allies around the world. I've got the exact opposite thing is we're acting with dispatch. We're acting, committing to what we said we would do.
But Armin Laschet, the likely successor to German Chancellor Merkel, said this is the biggest debacle that NATO has seen since its foundation. And here is the chairman of the British Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee.
To see their commander-in-chief call into question the courage of men I fought with, to claim that they ran. It's shameful. Those who have never fought for the colors they fly should be careful about criticizing those who have.
Mr. Secretary, does the president not know what's going on?
This is an incredibly emotional time for many of us, and including allies and partners who've been shoulder to shoulder with us in Afghanistan for 20 years, at high cost to themselves as well as to us. They stood with us after 9/11, invoked Article 5 of NATO for the first time. An attack on one is an attack on all, and we've been there together. But I've got to tell you this, Chris, from the get-go, I've spent more time with our NATO partners in Brussels, virtually, from before the president made his decision to when he made his decision to every time since. We've been working very, very closely together. We've gotten the G7 together, NATO together, the UN Security Council together. We had 113 countries, thanks to our diplomacy, put out a clear understanding of the Taliban's requirements to let people leave the country.
Respectfully, look, I'm not questioning whether or not the allies have a right to complain. I'm not questioning whether or not al-Qaeda has a presence. The president said al-Qaeda is gone. It's not gone. The president said he's not heard any criticism from the allies. There's been a lot of criticism from the allies. Words matter, and the words of the president matter most.
Chris, all I can tell you is what I've heard. And again, this is a powerfully emotional time for a lot of allies and partners, as it is for me, as it is for us. But I've also heard this. I've heard across the board deep appreciation and thanks from allies and partners for everything that we've done to bring our allies and partners out of harm's way. This has been a remarkable part of the effort. I've seen them stand up, step up to help out, including, as I said, agreements with more than 24 countries now to help on transit. And beyond that, we're very focused together on the way forward, including the way forward in Afghanistan, and setting very clear expectations for the Taliban in the days, weeks, and months ahead.
I've got two more questions I want to ask you, Secretary.
So, I pretty much pre-criticized the clip, or actually was giving positive reviews of Chris Wallace's cross-examination of Antony Blinken, because I think it is important for people in power to be cross-examined about, especially when the president is making factually incorrect statements, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican. Although I think Chris Wallace is a little harder on the Democrats than the Republicans, and I've shown that over the years. Although I think that even when I was watching that again, one thing I noticed when he was asking the question about how Biden says our allies aren't criticizing us, the only quotes that Fox News used there was from Angela Merkel's likely successor in Germany, and this guy in the UK from the head of the Foreign Affairs Committee. I mean, that's not like the head of government in either of those countries yet. I think they use those quotes because it could exaggerate the criticism some, or I don't know, maybe they were just the most soundbite worthy. And then the question that Chris Wallace asked Antony Blinken at the end of those clips was, does the president not know what's going on? Which, of course, reinforces the big Republican talking point that you see all the time on Fox News that, since Biden is the oldest president at inauguration in U.S. history, that he's got like dementia or doesn't know what's going on. I mean, whether he's as quick as he was 20 years ago, I don't know, but he always had a penchant for gaffes. And anyway, I don't want to go off on that whole tangent, but that would be one criticism I would make of Chris Wallace there. But at least he's better than Major Garrett, who used to be on Fox News. In fact, I always try to read some of the live comments along the way. I saw a comment from Jackson Heathen earlier. Let me put this up here. Yes, Major Garrett did used to be a supposedly straight news anchor on Fox News and did participate in some Fox News biased stories. But here, this is more like superficiality. That was the media bias that goes across all of the corporate news media, Fox News and the other four as well. Superficiality is one of the biases that you always see in news coverage. And they ask like some of the stupidest questions, like this one is about like the poll numbers that show there's like this snapshot in time when there's been a lot of bad coverage of stuff going on in Afghanistan that so that is the basis of Major Garrett's question, which I think is really superficial, but I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that final Biden administration questioning clip together over here.
The president said that we have an agreement with the Taliban. Mr. Secretary, that implies we are negotiating with them. Does that not confer upon them already legitimacy?
No, we have. We've had for a long time contact with the Taliban, both at a political level in Doha, going back some years, as well as now on the ground in Kabul, a working relationship in order to deconflict, in order to work through any problems with people getting to the airport. That's been very important to making sure that we can actually advance our own interests in getting people out safely and effectively as possible. So that's the nature of the relationship.
And someone in our audience might listen to you, Mr. Secretary, and say, oh, so we have to ask the Taliban for permission for American citizens to leave. True or not true?
They are in control of Kabul. That is the reality. That's the reality that we have to deal with.
How comfortable are you with that, Mr. Secretary?
What I'm focused on, what we're all focused on, is getting people out and making sure that we're doing everything possible to do that. And in this case, it is, I think, a requirement of the job to be in contact with the Taliban, which controls Kabul. And look, what we've seen, Major, is also pretty remarkable. Go back a week. The government fell. And by the way, I was on the phone with President Karzai the day before when he was telling me his intent, as he put it, to fight to the death. Well, the next day he was gone. The military collapsed. And in the space of that week, our military went in, secured the airport, got our embassy to safety at the airport from the embassy compound, began this remarkable evacuation effort. And as I said, we had about 8,000 people out just in the last 24 hours since going back to the end of July. It's 30,000 people. And that's quite extraordinary. It doesn't just happen. A tremendous amount of planning and effort went into that, including a lot of pre-planning. And that's what we're focused on now, getting that mission done.
Mr. Secretary, you may have heard in our poll that 60% of those we talked to now fear there is more threat of terrorism in the United States because the Taliban is in control.
Oh, more polling. But I'm sorry, I was kind of like, I couldn't remember, and I even have it in my summary of what that last clip was. I couldn't remember what it was that I thought was so superficial about Major Garrett's questioning. It's because the question, are you negotiating with the Taliban, when obviously they're having hour-to-hour, day-to-day communications with the Taliban, to at least the military is. So that's kind of a ridiculous question. And Dash and Sandy are both over here together as my live in-studio viewers today. I even took a brief clip of them during that you'll be able to hear the last clip in the background when I show you the bonus Dash and Sandy or Dandy clip in a minute. But you not only did Major Garrett ask Antony Blinken that question about are you negotiating with the Taliban that was kind of ridiculous, he missed something that excuse me, I heard the very first time I listened to that interview. And when I checked out the transcript today, because I saw that they even had like a little correction in the State Department corrected, you saw that Antony Blinken claimed that the day before Kabul fell, he was on the phone with President Hamid Karzai, who is not the president of Afghanistan. It was Ashraf Ghani, and that was a mistake, I guess. But you would think that a journalist listening to that would have followed up on that. And I guess that kind of supports what Jackson Heathen said before. That Major Garrett is, I don't know, maybe he still has some stain on him from his time at Fox News. But the final clip I want to show you talks there. It's interesting. The good segue between that last clip and this clip is Hamid Karzai, who comes up in this clip of Sarah Chayes. Remember, I promised you another Sarah Chayes clip. Sarah Chayes is the person who I quoted in my February 2009 article. She lived in Afghanistan. She speaks Pashto. She has a lot of experience with what was going on there, especially in like 2009, 2010, 2000. And I showed a clip of her at the beginning in which she said that one of the problems in Afghanistan was bad cops. Well, she also talks about President Hamid Karzai and how, and says something I haven't heard anyone really talking about, how the Taliban themselves are kind of an invading force in Afghanistan, and Hamid Karzai is somewhat responsible getting them from Pakistan to Afghanistan. And the perspective on the way Pakistan is really the evil genius behind what's going on in this whole Afghanistan humanitarian crisis right now, and yet they still remain our allies. And of course, Saudi Arabia gets mentioned in this clip. You don't hear the way Saudi Arabia is involved in this whole debacle as often as you should. So I want to give you a chance to watch that very rare analysis. This is a Caddy K, who's often on MSNBC's Morning Joe. This is from this morning. Caddy K asking about how Pakistan is benefiting from this whole situation, and gets, I think, an answer worth waiting for the final newsmaker clip today over here.
Can I ask just a bit more of a regional question, Sarah, and where this leaves Pakistan and U.S. relations with Pakistan going forward now that the Taliban are in control of Afghanistan? I mean, they've been sort of fairly quiet since the Taliban have taken over, but how much does this strengthen Pakistan's hand at the moment?
Well, they haven't been all that quiet. In fact, the crowing that's going on amongst Pakistani officials on social media is pretty transparent. So let me just step us back for a second and explain another, I think, fable that we have often been told, is that the Taliban arose inside the city of Kandahar. I spent 5 years talking to people, both ordinary Afghans who would live in Kandahar at the time and across the border in Quetta, Pakistan, and with a number of the key actors who had been part of that drama back in 1994. And the truth is that the Taliban did not spontaneously arise inside Afghanistan. In fact, they were fomented, they were concocted across the border in Pakistan, probably with quite a bit of Saudi Arabian money as well, because both countries were setting up these very strict and distorted madrasas, teaching a distorted version of Islam. But it was the Pakistani Military Intelligence Agency that organized the Taliban. And in fact, I spoke to Mujahideen commanders who were in control of parts of Kandahar, who told how, get ready for this, President Hamid Karzai, America's first choice to be the first president of a post-Taliban Afghanistan, he was the very one who negotiated the entry of the Taliban into Afghanistan from Pakistan at the behest of the Pakistani Military Intelligence Agency. And lo, we discover him again in Kabul in the midst of this clearly negotiated defeat of Afghanistan and handing of it over back to the ISI-influenced Taliban. So Pakistan is in a much better position today than it was, 5 years ago. And let's just remember that the Pakistani military is also who provided nuclear secrets to North Korea and to Iran, and it's also the country that harbored Osama bin Laden in a safe house right next to the Pakistani, military academy. So this is a country that is one of the most hostile to U.S. interests in the world. And I just cannot understand why the U.S. government has persisted in considering it an ally.
All right, Sarah, thank you so much for being with us. Sarah Chayes, we greatly appreciate it. And that is the other part of the article where it's just worse than we even imagined. When you look at the ISI and look at Pakistan's involvement here and the rise and the sustaining of the Taliban.
And if you go to the video description, I have first media mentioned, and I have summaries of all 14 clips, but under that there are sources, and one of the sources I have down there is Sarah Chayes' article, The Ides of August. I saw it was updated like earlier today, and I highly recommend reading it if you want to have a deeper understanding of both the current situation in Afghanistan and what's happened there during the last 20 years. I don't know, Joe Scarborough has not been the best messenger. He keeps talking about kind of like what I was talking about with that Martha Raddatz interview of Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, how a lot of people, especially in the military-industrial complex, wanted to leave a small number of troops there. Nothing bad would have happened. Well, that is, I don't think that if you read the Sarah Chayes article that you will come to that conclusion. I think it has been a doomed enterprise for a long time, and we should have gotten out a long time ago. And anyway, that's what I talked about last week. That's kind of the final comment I'll make on this week. Although I did promise a Dash and Sandy or Dandy clip of my dog and cat Dash the cat has left. Sandy's still over there snoring. But I did get a little interaction of them during a previous clip, as I promised, which I will finish off the live stream with today over here.
Advance our own interests in getting people out safely and effectively as possible. So that's the nature of the relationship.
And someone in our audience might listen to you, Mr. Secretary, and say, oh, so we have to ask the Taliban for permission for American citizens to leave. True or not true?
They are in control of Kabul. That is the reality. That's the reality that we have to deal with.
So there you see what I see when I look right over there to my, or left over there to my left, I guess. Those are my two live viewers in the studio audience. Sandy has lifted up her head, Sandy the dog, but Dash the cat is long gone. Anyway, I hope you appreciate the time and effort I put into picking out those 14 clips for you and adding my commentary and criticism. I will be back next Monday and every Monday, at least through the summer, and then I'll see how I want to proceed. I actually kind of like doing the last couple live streams. I don't get to talk about foreign policy and military history and strategy that much because usually we're talking more about domestic politics, and important things are coming up this week in terms of voting rights, in terms of the infrastructure bills that I talked about a couple weeks ago, in terms of criminal justice reform. All that has to be taken care of in Congress this week. And of course, the ongoing COVID story here in the United States is certainly not ended yet. So maybe that's what I'll be covering coming up. I hope to see you next Monday and the rest of the Mondays that I keep doing this for however long it keeps going. Until then, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.